The Philadelphia Convention of 1787, the birth of the presidency.
A nation without a leader, chaos after the revolution. But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you. When the smoke cleared from the American Revolutionary War, the newborn United States found itself victorious, yet fragile. Freed from the grip of British monarchy, the 13 colonies were no longer just rebellious territories, they were now an independent nation. However, one monumental question loomed large. Who would lead this new nation, and how would it be governed? The answer was far from obvious in the chaotic years following independence. Without a central leader or coherent federal structure, the young republic teetered on the edge of disintegration. It wasn't until the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 that the blueprint for the American presidency was carefully debated, forged, and ratified, laying the foundation for the nation's enduring political system. The aftermath of revolution, a leaderless Confederation. In 1781, the Articles of Confederation became the first Constitution of the United States, but it was a weak framework by design. Distrustful of centralized authority, especially after years of monarchical oppression, American leaders crafted a government that intentionally lacked a strong executive branch. Power was decentralized among the states, and the National Congress had limited abilities to enforce laws, raise taxes, or regulate commerce. There was no president, no executive authority, and no unified vision to drive national policy. The absence of a central leader meant there was no single figure to rally the people, represent the country in foreign affairs, or coordinate responses to internal crises. As a result, the post-war years were marred by economic turmoil, political instability, and social unrest. Shays' Rebellion, a symbol of national disorder. The dangers of a weak federal government came to a head with Shays' Rebellion in 1786-1787. Led by Revolutionary War veteran Daniel Shays, the uprising was a response to crushing debt and harsh economic policies in Massachusetts. When the federal government proved powerless to help suppress the rebellion, it sent a chilling message. The country could not govern itself effectively under the Articles of Confederation. This unrest underscored the urgent need for a stronger national government and became a catalyst for convening the Philadelphia Convention in May 1787. Although the original goal was to revise the Articles of Confederation, it quickly became clear that a complete overhaul was necessary. The Philadelphia Convention, forging a new framework. 70 delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island refused to send representatives, met in secrecy in Philadelphia's independence. Among them were some of the brightest minds of the era: George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and Benjamin Franklin. The delegates shared a common goal: to create a sustainable and resilient political structure that would hold the fragile Union together. From the outset, it was evident that a centralized executive authority was essential. But what would that leader look like? How much power should they hold? And most importantly, how could the presidency be strong enough to govern without becoming tyrannical? Debating the presidency. Between monarchy and anarchy, the idea of a single executive was contentious. Some delegates feared that creating a powerful leader would resemble the monarchy they had just overthrown. Others argued that without such a leader, the country would descend into chaos. James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, envisioned a system of checks and balances that would prevent any branch of government from becoming too powerful. The presidency, he argued, needed to be independent from the legislature, but still accountable to the people. Debates raged over the length of the president's term, the method of election, the scope of authority, and the possibility of re-election. Should the president be chosen by Congress, the states, or directly by the people? Would a single executive be safer than a council of leaders? These questions dominated the summer of 1787. Eventually, compromises were reached. The result was a unitary executive, a single president, elected indirectly through an electoral college, serving a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election. The president would act as commander-in-chief of the military, have the power to veto legislation, appoint federal officials, and conduct foreign policy, all under the constraints of congressional oversight and judicial review. The presidency. A new kind of leadership. The creation of the presidency was revolutionary in itself. Unlike the monarchies of Europe, the U.S. president would derive legitimacy not from birthright, but from a constitution and the consent of the governed. It was a delicate balance, an executive powerful enough to lead, yet limited enough to prevent tyranny. George Washington, unanimously elected as the first president in 1789, set critical precedents that shaped the office. He declined to run for a third term, reinforcing the concept of peaceful transfer of power. Washington also established norms for executive restraint, consultation with Congress, and the separation of civilian and military authority. His leadership helped legitimize the presidency in the eyes of both domestic constituents and foreign powers. It was Washington's character, his humility, restraint, and commitment to the Republic that gave the fledgling office the credibility it needed to survive and grow. Building a lasting political system, the presidency was just one piece of the puzzle. The Philadelphia Convention also gave birth to a comprehensive system of separation of powers, dividing government into 3 co-equal branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Each would check the powers of the others, ensuring a balance that would guard against tyranny or mob rule. Additionally, federalism was codified, dividing authority between national and state governments. This structure allowed for local governance while preserving national unity, another key factor in stabilizing the post-revolutionary chaos. Over time, the Constitution proved remarkably resilient. Through war, economic depression, civil strife, and technological upheaval, the presidency and the broader political system adapted and endured. The founders' decision to build a strong yet accountable executive was central to that success. Lessons from a leaderless beginning. The years between 1781 and 1787 offer a stark reminder of the dangers of a government without leadership. The Articles of Confederation, though noble in their democratic intent, failed to provide the necessary tools for governance. Without a president or an executive branch, the nation was paralyzed by inaction, factionalism, and disunity. The Philadelphia Convention's decision to create the presidency was a bold and visionary act. It acknowledged the need for leadership, not just symbolic or ceremonial, but practical and decisive. At the same time, it embedded that leadership within a framework of accountability, transparency, and law. This balance remains the cornerstone of the American political system. Though the presidency has evolved, sometimes expanding in power, other times reined in, it continues to serve as the pivot around which the nation's governance turns. Conclusion. The power of leadership in a republic, a nation without a leader, is a ship without a rudder, adrift, vulnerable, and prone to collapse. After the American Revolution, the United States stood on the precipice of failure, not because it lacked courage or vision.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
The fragile Confederation, when America nearly collapsed. But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you. In the summer of 1787, a fragile experiment in self-government teetered on the edge of collapse. The United States, newly freed from British rule, found itself burdened by a weak central government, economic instability, and political disunity. The Articles of Confederation, the first governing document of the fledgling nation, had proven inadequate to unify the states or manage national affairs. It was in this climate of uncertainty and crisis that the Philadelphia Convention convened, ultimately leading to the creation of the United States Constitution and the invention of the presidency. This pivotal moment in American history not only reshaped the nation's political structure, but also laid the groundwork for the enduring system of checks and balances that defines the United States government today. The Articles of Confederation, a weak foundation. After winning independence in 1783, the United States operated under the Articles of Confederation, a document designed to prevent the rise of tyranny by ensuring that most power remained with the individual states. However, the fear of centralized authority led to a national government so weak it could neither levy taxes nor enforce laws. Congress had no power to regulate commerce between states or with foreign nations, and there was no executive branch to implement legislation or ensure national cohesion. The consequences were profound. States printed their own currencies, often leading to inflation and economic chaos. Trade disputes between states became common, and the lack of a unified foreign policy made the young nation vulnerable on the international stage. Domestic unrest, most notably Shays' Rebellion in 1786, highlighted the inability of the Confederation Congress to maintain law and order or respond effectively to crises. It became increasingly clear that the existing system was unsustainable. The Philadelphia Convention, a nation in crisis, recognizing the dire state of the Union, leaders from 12 of the 13 states, Rhode Island refused to participate, convened in Philadelphia in May 1787. Their original mandate was to revise the Articles of Confederation, but many delegates arrived with a broader goal in mind: to design a new framework of government that could ensure the survival of the Republic. Presided over by George Washington, the convention quickly moved beyond amending the Articles and began drafting an entirely new constitution. The discussions were marked by intense debate and compromise, especially around issues of representation, the balance of power between large and small states, and the role of the executive branch. The delegates understood that a strong but constrained executive was essential to address the failures of the Articles while avoiding the despotism they had fought to escape. Inventing the presidency, a bold experiment, one of the most contentious and consequential debates at the convention centered on the creation of the presidency. The founders had no model for an elected executive in a republic on such a large scale. They had to design a role that combined the energy and decisiveness of a monarch with the accountability and restraint expected in a democracy. The result was a single executive, the president, vested with powers that were both broad and checked. The president would be commander-in-chief of the armed forces, have the power to veto legislation, appoint federal officials and judges, with Senate approval, and conduct foreign policy. However, these powers were counterbalanced by a system of checks and balances. Congress could override vetoes, the judiciary could review executive actions, and impeachment provided a mechanism for removing a president who abused power. Perhaps the most innovative feature was the method of election, the Electoral College. This system aimed to balance the influence of populous and less populous states, while insulating the selection process from direct manipulation. Though controversial and still debated today, the Electoral College was an attempt to blend democratic ideals with pragmatic governance. George Washington, the first president. No discussion of the creation of the presidency is complete without acknowledging the role of George Washington. His leadership during the Revolutionary War and the Philadelphia Convention earned him unparalleled respect. When the Constitution was ratified and the new government formed in 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. Washington's presidency was instrumental in shaping the office. He set precedents that endure to this day, including the formation of a cabinet, the peaceful transfer of power, and the principle of a two-term limit, which later became law with the 22nd Amendment. Washington's restraint and commitment to Republican ideals helped solidify public trust in the new system. The Constitution, a living document. The Constitution that emerged from the Philadelphia Convention was not perfect. It required 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, to secure ratification. However, it established a durable framework that balanced federal and state powers, delineated the roles of each branch of government, and created mechanisms for adaptation and reform. Central to this system was the presidency, a role powerful enough to lead the nation, yet bound by legal and institutional constraints. The presidency became the keystone of the American political system, providing leadership during crises, representing the nation abroad, and executing the laws passed by Congress. Legacy of the Philadelphia Convention. The Philadelphia Convention of 1787 was a turning point in American history. It marked the transition from a loose confederation of states to a unified federal republic. The creation of the presidency was one of its most daring and impactful achievements, offering a model of executive leadership that has endured for over 2 centuries. The success of the Constitution and the presidency it created was not guaranteed. It required the vision, compromise, and dedication of leaders who understood the fragility of the American experiment. They crafted a system designed to withstand internal divisions and external threats. A system that has guided the United States through civil war, global conflict, and social upheaval. Conclusion: the fragility and resilience of American democracy. The story of the Philadelphia Convention and the creation of the presidency is a testament to the challenges and possibilities of democratic governance. It reveals how close the United States came to failure and how bold ideas, forged in the crucible of crisis, can lead to lasting solutions. The presidency, as conceived in 1787, remains a dynamic institution. Its power has expanded and contracted over time, shaped by historical events, judicial rulings, and public expectations. Yet its foundation, crafted in a sweltering hall in Philadelphia by men determined to save their country, remains intact. In Satori, remembering the fragile Confederation that nearly failed, we gain a deeper appreciation for the Constitution's ingenuity and the presidency's essential role in preserving the Union. It is a legacy, not of perfection, but of perseverance. A reminder that democracy, though always fragile, can endure through vision, vigilance, and a shared commitment to the common good.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
Journey to Philadelphia, the meeting that changed the world.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
In the sweltering summer of 1787, delegates from across the 13 American states converged on the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia. Their mission was vague yet vital: to
revise the Articles of Confederation, a document that had proven inadequate for governing a burgeoning and increasingly fragmented nation.
What they accomplished over the course of 4 months would redefine the course of history. Out of debate, compromise, and visionary thinking emerged the United States Constitution and, with it, the very idea of an American presidency. The Philadelphia Convention, also known as the Constitutional Convention, was not just a gathering of men, but a crucible from which a new form of government was forged. The fragile state of the Union. After the Revolutionary War, the United States was a confederation, in name only. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government had no power to tax, no executive branch to enforce laws, and no judiciary to interpret them. States operated like independent nations, often enacting conflicting laws and imposing tariffs on one another. Foreign powers, including Britain and Spain, saw the United States as weak and divided. Internally, rebellions such as Shays' Rebellion highlighted the urgent need for a stronger central authority. Into this maelstrom of dysfunction stepped 55 delegates, including many of the most prominent minds of the era: James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, and George Washington, who was unanimously elected to preside over the convention. While their original goal was to amend the Articles of Confederation, it soon became clear that a complete overhaul was necessary. The birth of the presidency, one of the most profound challenges faced by the convention, was determining the nature of the executive branch. The United States had just fought a war to escape monarchy. How could they now create a strong executive without sliding back into tyranny? The delegates debated fiercely. Some advocated for a plural executive, a committee rather than a single individual. Others feared that a weak executive would doom the new nation to chaos. It was James Madison, often called the father of the Constitution, who, along with Alexander Hamilton and others, argued for a single energetic executive. The compromise they reached was revolutionary. The executive power would be vested in a single president, elected not by direct popular vote, but through an electoral college, a mechanism designed to balance the influence of populous and less populous states. The president would serve a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election and would be endowed with significant powers, the ability to veto legislation, command the military, make treaties with Senate approval, and appoint federal officials and judges. Yet, just as crucial as the powers granted were the checks placed upon them. The president could be impeached by Congress for high crimes and misdemeanors. This delicate balance between authority and accountability was an innovation born of both philosophical ideals and practical necessity. Debate, compromise, and innovation. The process of crafting the presidency was emblematic of the convention as a whole. The delegates were men of differing interests and ideologies, representing agrarian southern states and mercantile northern ones, large states and small. Compromise was essential. One key compromise was the Connecticut Compromise, which established a bicameral legislature with proportional representation in the House and equal representation in the Senate. This same spirit of give and take shaped the presidency. Concerns about executive overreach were assuaged by separating powers among 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. This structure, known as the system of checks and balances, ensured that no single branch could dominate the others. The very existence of a president was a radical idea. No other republic in history had succeeded in creating a powerful executive without lapsing into autocracy. The framers studied ancient Rome and contemporary European systems to avoid past pitfalls. Their answer was not only institutional constraints, but also a reliance on civic virtue and public accountability. George Washington, the living blueprint, the theoretical framework of the presidency found its embodiment in George Washington. Though the Constitution did not name him, all understood that he would be the first president. His stature as a war hero and his character as a man of principle made him uniquely suited to set the precedent. Washington's decision to voluntarily step down after 2 terms cemented the principle that the president was a servant of the people, not a ruler for life. His leadership style, modest yet firm, set the tone for the office and helped solidify the legitimacy of the new federal government. He refused to be called anything more regal than Mr. President, reinforcing the democratic ethos that underpinned the entire constitutional project. A lasting legacy, the convention adjourned on September 17, 1787, with 39 of the 55 delegates signing the final document. The Constitution then went to the states for ratification, sparking fierce debate between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Ultimately, the promise of a Bill of Rights helped secure its acceptance. The presidency, as conceived in Philadelphia, was not a static institution, but a dynamic one. Over the centuries, it has evolved to meet the demands of a changing nation and world. From Abraham Lincoln preserving the Union to Franklin D. Roosevelt leading during the Great Depression and World War II, the office has grown in scope and influence. Yet the foundational principles laid down in 1787, the balance of power, the separation of duties, and the electoral system, remain. Conclusion: the enduring impact of a historic gathering. The Philadelphia Convention was a moment of unprecedented innovation. The delegates did more than revise a flawed system. They invented a new form of governance that combined strength with accountability, unity with diversity, and ideals with pragmatism. At the heart of this design was the presidency, a role crafted with caution, vision, and faith in the capacity of democratic institutions. In creating the office of the president, the framers did not simply fill a vacancy in a new government. They articulated a new kind of leadership, one that would reflect the will of the people, serve under the law, and uphold the values of a constitutional republic. The journey to Philadelphia was thus not just a geographical one, but a journey into the uncharted territory of democratic governance. It was a meeting that truly changed the world. As we reflect on the legacy of 1787, we are reminded that democracy is not a finished product, but an ongoing endeavor. The institutions born in Philadelphia require constant vigilance, engagement, and renewal. The office of the president, conceived in both caution and hope, continues to embody the promise and challenge of self-government in a diverse and ever-changing nation.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
The Great Debate: Should there be a president?
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
The question of whether there should be a president at the helm of a nation's executive branch is not merely a contemporary political debate. It is one that dates back to the founding of the United States. In 1787, during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the framers of the U.S. Constitution grappled with the fundamental issue of executive power. They were charged with creating a new government strong enough to maintain unity and order, yet constrained enough to prevent tyranny. Central to this was the idea of a single executive leader, the President of the United States. The Philadelphia Convention, also known as the Constitutional Convention, was convened to address the inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation. Under the Articles, there was no executive branch, no president, just a loose confederation of states with a weak central government. This system had proven ineffective in managing the economic, diplomatic, and security challenges facing the fledgling republic. Delegates arrived in Philadelphia with a shared understanding that something had to change, but they were deeply divided on how to structure the new government. One of the most contentious issues was the executive branch. Should there be a single president, a committee of executives? Should the executive have veto power? How should the president be elected? These questions ignited intense debates that would shape not only the structure of the American government, but also the very concept of leadership in a democratic republic. Advocates for a single executive, including Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, argued that unity in the executive would promote decisiveness, accountability, and efficiency. Hamilton, in particular, feared the dangers of a weak executive, drawing lessons from the inefficacies of the Articles of Confederation. He argued in the Federalist Papers that a single executive would be more easily held accountable by the public and the other branches of government. A plural executive, on the other hand, could lead to paralysis, infighting, and a diffusion of responsibility. Opponents of a strong, singular executive worried about the emergence of a new form of monarchy. Memories of King George III were still fresh in the minds of many delegates. They feared that investing too much power in one individual would pave the way for tyranny. Some delegates proposed a council-style executive or a system with limited, rotating leadership. Others suggested that Congress should select the executive, fearing that a popular vote might be too easily swayed by demagoguery or regional imbalances. Compromise was key to the convention's success. The resulting structure of the presidency in the U.S. Constitution reflected a careful balancing act. The president would be a single individual, elected for a term of 4 years, with powers that were both defined and checked by the other branches of government. The Electoral College was created as a compromise between direct popular election and selection by Congress. The president would have the power to veto legislation, appoint judges and ambassadors, and serve as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. But Congress retained the power to override vetoes, approve appointments, and declare war. This structure has proven remarkably durable. Yet, the debate over the necessity and structure of the presidency has never truly ended. Over the centuries, critics have questioned whether the presidency grants too much power to one individual. The modern American president commands vast resources, exercises significant influence over domestic and foreign policy, and is often seen as the face of the nation. Some argue that this concentration of power is dangerous, especially in times of crisis when executive actions may bypass legislative oversight. Moreover, the evolution of mass media and technology has transformed the presidency into a highly visible and often personality-driven office. The founders could not have anticipated the rise of the 24-hour news cycle, social media, and the global stage on which modern presidents operate. These developments have amplified the influence of individual presidents and intensified the scrutiny they face. Despite these concerns, many defenders of the presidential system point to its advantages. A single executive can respond swiftly in times of crisis, coordinate complex government actions, and represent the nation with a unified voice. The system of checks and balances, they argue, provides sufficient safeguards against the abuse of power. Furthermore, regular elections ensure that presidents remain accountable to the electorate. Some scholars and political reformers, however, have proposed alternatives. Parliamentary systems, where the executive is drawn from the legislative branch and is subject to more immediate political accountability, are often cited as more stable and less prone to executive overreach. Others have suggested modifications to the US system, such as reducing the powers of the presidency, strengthening congressional authority, or reforming the Electoral College. These debates reflect broader questions about the nature of leadership, democracy, and governance. Should a democratic nation vest significant power in a single individual? Can institutional checks truly prevent the rise of authoritarianism? What is the optimal balance between efficiency and accountability in government? The framers of the Constitution did not provide definitive answers to these questions. Instead, they offered a framework, a living document capable of adaptation and reinterpretation. The presidency, as an institution, has evolved far beyond what the delegates in Philadelphia imagined. Yet the foundational debates of 1787 continue to resonate in contemporary political discourse. As citizens, it is our responsibility to engage with these questions. The legitimacy and effectiveness of the presidency depend not only on constitutional design but also on civic participation, informed debate, and the ongoing commitment to democratic principles. Whether one supports a strong presidency or favors greater diffusion of power, the conversation must remain grounded in history, guided by reason, and open to the possibilities of reform. In recent years, increasing political polarization has reignited questions about the scope and function of the presidency. Controversies surrounding executive orders, emergency powers, and the use of veto authority have highlighted the tensions embedded in the constitutional design. As partisanship deepens and trust in government institutions declines, the president is often seen simultaneously as a unifying symbol and a divisive figure. This paradox underscores the complexity of the office and the ongoing relevance of the original debate from 1787. In conclusion, the question, should there be a president, is not merely a theoretical exercise. It is a vital inquiry into how we are governed and by whom. The legacy of the Philadelphia Convention reminds us that the structures of power are not immutable. They are choices made by people, subject to change as societies evolve. In revisiting this great debate, we not only honor the intellectual rigor of the founders, but also reaffirm our role in shaping the future of democratic governance.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
The shadow of kings, fear of a new tyranny.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
In the sweltering summer of 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 American states gathered in Philadelphia to reimagine the political architecture of a fledgling republic. The Articles of Confederation had proven ineffective, unable to forge unity or provide a strong central government. As the Revolutionary War faded into memory, the challenge before these men was immense: to build a durable framework for a nation still haunted by the specter of monarchy. Central to this monumental task was the creation of a new, singular position of national leadership, the presidency. Yet designing this role brought with it a profound fear: the emergence of a new tyranny. The founding fathers of the United States, deeply shaped by Enlightenment ideals and their collective rebellion against the British Crown, approached the notion of executive power with caution and trepidation. Their lived experiences under King George III had left a lasting imprint, reinforcing their suspicion of concentrated authority. The very idea of establishing a powerful executive echoed the monarchical system they had fought so fiercely to escape. And yet, it was clear that the loose confederation of states, with its impotent Congress, could not meet the demands of governance, diplomacy, or defense. The Philadelphia Convention was thus a crucible of contradiction. Delegates wrestled with a paradox: how to empower a central leader enough to ensure effective governance, yet prevent the rise of a new despot. The debates were intense, and the solutions born from these discussions laid the bedrock for the American presidency, an office both empowered and constrained by the Constitution. James Madison, often hailed as the father of the Constitution, championed a system of checks and balances. He recognized that power, if left unchecked, would inevitably corrupt. The presidency, he believed, must be strong enough to enforce laws and conduct foreign policy, yet bound by a separation of powers that would forestall tyranny. Madison and his contemporaries drew from classical sources and recent history alike, citing Roman republicanism as well as British abuses to illustrate their fears and aspirations. One of the most contentious issues at the convention was how the president should be chosen. Some delegates advocated for direct election by the people, while others feared that popular vote would lead to demagoguery or favor populous states. The compromise, the Electoral College, was a reflection of this ambivalence. It was designed to balance popular sovereignty with elite oversight, a mechanism intended to buffer against the rise of charismatic tyrants. Another major debate centered on the term of office. The idea of a life-term presidency was raised and swiftly rejected, deemed too close to monarchy. Eventually, the framers settled on a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election, providing continuity without permanence. The president would serve as commander-in-chief and chief diplomat, but Congress would retain the power to declare war and approve treaties, ensuring that the executive could not act unilaterally. The inclusion of impeachment provisions was another safeguard against tyranny. Unlike a king, the president would be subject to removal from office for high crimes and misdemeanors. This accountability mechanism underscored the framers' commitment to a republic governed by laws, not individuals. George Washington's unanimous election as the first president in 1789 helped to soothe fears about the office. His reputation for humility, his voluntary surrender of power after the Revolutionary War, and his precedent of serving only 2 terms reassured many that the presidency would not devolve into monarchy. Yet even Washington was aware of the precarious balance the new system attempted to maintain. In his farewell address, he warned against the dangers of factionalism and the accumulation of power. As the nation grew, so too did the power of the presidency. Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase, Andrew Jackson's populist defiance of the Supreme Court, Abraham Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, each instance tested the limits of executive authority. These moments reflected the elasticity of the office, its ability to expand in times of crisis, and the enduring tension between liberty and order. The 20th and 21st centuries further complicated the founder's vision. Presidents like Franklin D. Roosevelt, who served 4 terms and wielded vast power during the Great Depression and World War II, redefined the scope of executive influence. The post-Watergate era saw new reforms aimed at reining in presidential power, including the War Powers Resolution and campaign finance regulations. Yet, the modern media landscape and the rise of the imperial presidency continue to challenge the constitutional boundaries laid out in 1787. Another layer of complexity arises from global interdependence and the president's role as the face of American democracy abroad. Modern presidents are not only domestic executives, but also global actors whose decisions can affect the entire world. This dual role amplifies the need for restraint and wisdom in the exercise of power, lest the office morph into an unchecked global throne. Furthermore, the digital age has introduced new dimensions of executive influence. Social media allows presidents to speak directly to millions, bypassing traditional institutions and filters. While this democratization of communication can foster transparency, it also carries risks of misinformation, polarization, and personality-driven politics that echo the fears of charismatic tyranny the framers sought to avoid. Today, the presidency remains a paradox, an office born out of fear of kingship, yet often imbued with king-like power. The founder's vision was not static. It anticipated conflict and evolution. The system they designed depends not only on legal frameworks, but on civic virtue, institutional integrity, and the active engagement of the citizenry. The shadow of kings still lingers in American political consciousness. It surfaces in debates over executive orders, national emergencies, and the balance between security and freedom. It is present when presidents are accused of overreach or when they are elevated to near mythical status by supporters. The fear that animated the Constitutional Convention remains a vital part of the nation's political DNA. In reflecting on the creation of the presidency at the Philadelphia Convention, we see a nation attempting to forge a new path without forgetting the perils of the old one. The delegates did not seek to eradicate power. They sought to tame it. They built a system that could wield authority without succumbing to it. That system is not perfect, nor is it immune to failure. But it remains one of the most ambitious experiments in balancing freedom with governance in human history. As we navigate the challenges of the present, the lessons of 1787 still resonate. The presidency must be strong enough to lead, yet accountable enough to serve. The Republic must remain vigilant, not in fear of kings past, but in defense against new tyrannies yet to come.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
James Madison, the architect of the Republic.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
In the grand narrative of American history, few figures have exerted as profound an influence on the structure and philosophy of the nation's government as James Madison. Often hailed as the father of the Constitution, Madison played a pivotal role in shaping the political landscape of the United States, particularly through his contributions during the Philadelphia Convention of 1787. It was here that the foundation for the American presidency was laid, transforming abstract ideas about leadership and governance into a functioning executive branch. Madison's vision and meticulous efforts not only influenced the creation of the office of the president, but also established the philosophical underpinnings of the American political system. The Philadelphia Convention, a crucible of ideas. May 1787, delegates from 13 states convened in Philadelphia with the intention of revising the Articles of Confederation. However, what transpired over the ensuing months was far more ambitious. Recognizing the deficiencies of the Articles in addressing the needs of a growing and increasingly complex nation, the delegates, led in intellectual force by Madison, opted to draft an entirely new framework of government. Madison arrived at the convention armed with what would become the Virginia Plan, an ambitious proposal that laid the groundwork for the structure of the federal government. Madison's Virginia Plan advocated for a strong central government with 3 distinct branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Central to this plan was the establishment of a singular executive, a president, who would ensure that laws passed by the legislature were faithfully executed. This idea marked a radical departure from the decentralized and weak executive model of the Articles of Confederation. For Madison, the creation of a powerful yet balanced executive was essential to the longevity and stability of the Republic. Madison's vision of executive power, at a time when many Americans harbored deep suspicions of centralized power, stemming from their recent struggle against British monarchy, Madison had the difficult task of advocating for an executive that was strong but not tyrannical. His challenge was to design a presidency that would be energetic and effective in governance, while simultaneously being constrained by checks and balances. Madison argued that an executive must possess the vigor necessary to respond decisively to crises, enforce the law, and represent the nation in foreign affairs. At the same time, he feared the potential for abuse inherent in unchecked executive authority. Thus, he envisioned a system where the president would be held accountable through separation of powers, regular elections, and a system of checks and balances involving the legislative and judicial branches. It was Madison who helped guide debates on how to elect the president, ultimately contributing to the creation of the Electoral College. He also supported fixed terms for the presidency, initially proposing a 7-year term with no re-election, though he later accepted the 4-year renewable term. These ideas ensured a balance between continuity in leadership and democratic accountability. Federalist number 51 and the doctrine of checks and balances. Madison's thoughts on governance were further crystallized in the Federalist Papers, a series of essays written to promote the ratification of the new Constitution. Federalist number 51, perhaps his most famous contribution, articulates the principle that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. This notion underpins the system of checks and balances that defines the American government. According to Madison, the best way to prevent tyranny was not merely through good intentions, but through institutional design. Each branch of government, including the executive, must have the means and motivation to resist encroachments by the others. This framework ensured that the presidency, while vested with significant authority, could not dominate the political system. Madison's belief in the necessity of structural safeguards was not merely theoretical. He feared that without a strong yet constrained presidency, the Republic could devolve into either anarchy or autocracy. His contributions at the Philadelphia Convention thus represent a careful balancing act between power and liberty, energy and restraint, crafting a lasting legacy. While Madison did not speak as frequently during the convention as some of his peers, his influence was nonetheless pervasive. He was instrumental in drafting many of the key provisions related to the executive branch, and was the most meticulous recorder of the debates and compromises that took place. His notes from the Philadelphia Convention remain among the most important historical documents from that period, offering invaluable insights into the birth of the presidency. Following the convention, Madison played a central role in securing the ratification of the Constitution. His collaboration with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay in writing the Federalist Papers was crucial in persuading skeptical states to embrace the new framework of government. Without Madison's persuasive advocacy and intellectual leadership, It is unlikely that the presidency, or the Constitution itself, would have taken the form we recognize today. Madison as president, ironically, Madison would later occupy the very office he helped design. As the fourth president of the United States, serving from 1809 to 1817, Madison faced the ultimate test of his theories and practice. His presidency was marked by the War of 1812, a conflict that tested the strength of the federal government and the resolve of its executive leader. Though his tenure was not without controversy, Madison's performance as president reflected many of the principles he had espoused decades earlier. He respected the bounds of constitutional authority, worked in concert with Congress, and upheld the notion of a balanced government. His actions as president provided a living example of how the office could function within the limits of a constitutional republic. The enduring relevance of Madison's contributions today, James Madison's influence continues to be felt in every aspect of American political life. The office of the presidency, as envisioned and shaped by Madison, remains a central pillar of the nation's government. His insistence on checks and balances, separation of powers, and accountable leadership has withstood the test of time, guiding the United States through centuries of political change. In an era where the powers and limits of the presidency are frequently debated, Madison's work offers a valuable reminder of the principles upon which the office was founded. His contributions at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 were not merely acts of political engineering. They were expressions of a profound philosophical commitment to Republican governance. James Madison did not simply help create a presidency. He helped define the nature of American democracy. For this reason, he remains rightly remembered as the architect of the Republic, a visionary who, through intellect and dedication, helped shape a nation's destiny.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
George Washington. Silent, but decisive.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
In the sweltering summer of 1787, delegates from 12 of the 13 American states gathered in Philadelphia to reshape the fledgling nation's government. The result of that convention, held behind tightly closed doors in Independence Hall, would become the United States Constitution. Among the many issues debated and resolved, one stood paramount: the creation of a new executive office, the presidency. Central to this transformation was a figure who spoke little, yet whose presence commanded respect, and whose actions set the tone for a new republic: George Washington. The Philadelphia Convention, also known as the Constitutional Convention, was initially convened to revise the Articles of Confederation. However, it soon became clear to most delegates that a complete overhaul of the system was necessary. The Articles had left the national government weak, particularly in its inability to enforce laws, raise revenue effectively, or unify the states under a cohesive policy framework. The challenge was to devise a system that balanced authority and liberty, federal and state power, and prevented tyranny without slipping into anarchy. One of the thorniest questions was how to structure the executive branch. Memories of British monarchical rule were still raw, and many delegates feared creating a powerful central authority that could devolve into despotism. Yet they also recognized the inefficiencies and chaos bred by the weak executive under the Articles. The answer would come in the form of a singular executive, a president, but the acceptance of this idea hinged heavily on one man: George Washington. Washington's presence at the convention was both symbolic and strategic. As the hero of the Revolutionary War and a figure of unimpeachable integrity, Washington was unanimously elected to preside over the proceedings. While he rarely spoke during debates, his mere attendance lent credibility to the convention and calmed fears about the potential for abuse of executive power. Delegates trusted that if Washington could accept and embody the role of president, it would not be one of ambition or tyranny, but of duty and Republican virtue. The debate over the presidency was intense. Delegates wrestled with questions about term length, method of election, powers, and checks. The final result was a uniquely American synthesis: a president who would be independently elected, albeit through an electoral college, serve a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election, and wield considerable powers, including command of the military, veto authority, and the ability to negotiate treaties, all tempered by a system of checks and balances. Yet this system, robust on paper, still required proof in practice. That proof would be George Washington himself. When Washington was unanimously elected as the first president in 1789, the Constitution had barely begun to take root. Washington was acutely aware that every action he took would set precedent. His decisions would shape not only how the presidency functioned, but how future Americans viewed the office. True to his nature, Washington approached the role with humility, restraint, and a deep sense of responsibility. Washington's leadership style as president was marked by deliberation and prudence. He surrounded himself with capable advisors, including Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Henry Knox, and Edmund Randolph, and encouraged open debate within his cabinet. While he often listened more than he spoke, when he made a decision, it carried decisive weight. He resisted the temptation to overstep his bounds, thereby reinforcing the limits of executive power, even as he demonstrated its effectiveness. One of his most important contributions was his handling of the presidency's symbolic and ceremonial aspects. Conscious of the danger of appearing monarchical, Washington avoided regal titles, insisting simply on being called Mr. President. He balanced the need for public dignity in the office with Republican simplicity, establishing a model for presidential conduct that endured for generations. Washington also set vital precedents in foreign policy and domestic authority. His decision to issue the Neutrality Proclamation in 1793, amidst the war between Britain and revolutionary France, established the principle that the executive had the power to set foreign policy, a move criticized by some, but upheld by history. His suppression of the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794 demonstrated that the federal government could and would enforce its laws, but he did so with care to minimize violence and ensure due process. Perhaps Washington's most significant act as president, however, was his voluntary departure from power. By choosing not to seek a third term, he established the norm of peaceful, voluntary transfer of executive authority, a norm later enshrined in the 22nd Amendment. In his farewell address, he warned against the dangers of factionalism, foreign entanglements, and excessive partisanship, offering a vision of civic virtue and national unity that remains relevant. In addition to his structural and symbolic contributions, Washington's understanding of the presidency extended to its role in unifying a diverse and often divided population. He made deliberate efforts to tour various regions of the country, visiting towns and meeting citizens to reinforce the idea of a single American identity. These journeys helped knit the fabric of the new nation, reinforcing a sense of national belonging that transcended local allegiances. Moreover, Washington's financial policies, heavily influenced by Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, but endorsed and supported by the president, helped stabilize the fledgling economy. The establishment of a national bank, assumption of state debts, and the creation of a standardized currency were controversial, yet pivotal in securing the economic foundations of the United States. Washington's willingness to back these measures, even when politically risky, underscored his commitment to practical governance over ideological purity. George Washington's role in shaping the American presidency cannot be overstated. He was the linchpin between theory and practice, between constitution and country. At the Philadelphia Convention, his silent watchfulness gave the delegates the confidence to create an executive office imbued with substantial authority. As president, his measured decisiveness gave the nation a working model of that office in action. Washington never sought power for its own sake. He accepted leadership out of a sense of duty, and it was precisely this self-restraint, this silence in speech, but decisiveness in action, that made him the ideal first president of the United States. His legacy lies not only in the wars he won or the positions he held, but in the integrity with which he held them. In a time of uncertainty, George Washington became the embodiment of Republican leadership, a silent but decisive force in the birth of a nation. Today, as Americans continue to navigate the complexities of executive power and democratic governance, the example set by Washington remains a touchstone. His conduct reminds us that the strength of a political system lies not only in its written rules, but in the character of those who interpret and implement them. In silence, George Washington shaped the presidency. In action, he defined it.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
A single executive, the road to one-man leadership.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
The summer of 1787, a group of men gathered in Philadelphia to undertake the monumental task of redesigning the government of the fledgling United States. The Articles of Confederation had proven inadequate in maintaining national unity and ensuring effective governance. The Constitutional Convention, as it would come to be known, gave rise to one of the most enduring political frameworks in history. At the heart of the debates was a question both practical and philosophical. Should the new nation be governed by a single executive, or should power be shared among several individuals? The decision to create a presidency, embodied in a single person, marked a radical departure from previous models and laid the cornerstone of American political structure. The historical context: fear of tyranny versus need for order. The delegates of the Philadelphia Convention were deeply influenced by both their recent experiences and centuries of political thought. Having fought a war to free themselves from monarchical rule, the idea of placing executive power in the hands of one person was met with suspicion and concern. The fear of tyranny was palpable. Many remembered the abuses of King George III and recoiled at anything that resembled a return to concentrated authority. However, the shortcomings of the Articles of Confederation were also evident. The lack of centralized executive power had led to legislative paralysis, weak foreign policy, and domestic unrest such as Shays' Rebellion. There was a growing consensus that a more effective form of governance was necessary, one that could act decisively, enforce laws, and command respect both at home and abroad. Debates at the convention, plural versus single executive, one of the most contentious issues during the convention was the nature of the executive branch. Some delegates, such as Edmund Randolph of Virginia, proposed a plural executive, perhaps a committee of three drawn from different regions, to prevent any one person from becoming too powerful. Others feared that multiple executives would lead to confusion, inefficiency, and a lack of accountability. Alexander Hamilton, one of the most vocal proponents of a strong central government, argued forcefully for a single executive. In his view, energy in the executive was essential to good government. A unitary executive could act with decisiveness, maintain secrecy when necessary, and be held clearly responsible for his actions. Hamilton's perspective found resonance with others who believed that a single executive would provide the leadership necessary to guide the new nation. The influence of political philosophy. The framers drew heavily on Enlightenment thinkers such as Montesquieu and Locke, but they also adapted those ideas to their unique context. Montesquieu, for instance, had emphasized the importance of the separation of powers to prevent tyranny. The framers took this to heart, creating a system of checks and balances between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The idea of a single executive did not mean unchecked power. Rather, it was carefully balanced within a broader, constitutional framework. The president would be elected, not inherited, would serve a limited term, not for life, and would be subject to impeachment and removal if he abused his office. These safeguards were designed to provide the energy of a singular leader without risking the return of monarchical tyranny. The presidency takes shape. The final version of the Constitution, completed in September 1787, established the office of President of the United States. The president would serve a 4-year term, be elected through an electoral college system, and wield significant powers. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the ability to veto legislation, the authority to appoint judges and diplomats, with the key, Senate approval, and the responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This framework represented a profound innovation. Unlike monarchs who claimed divine right, or executives who served at the pleasure of a legislature, the American president was a distinct, co-equal branch of government. He would operate within a system of mutual checks, constrained by law and public accountability. Washington as the model executive, the success of the new presidency owed much to the character of its first occupant, George Washington. Unanimously elected in 1789, Washington set many of the precedents that would define the office. He emphasized the nonpartisan nature of the role, established a cabinet to assist with decision-making, and voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, reinforcing the principle of peaceful transition of power. Washington's leadership lent legitimacy to the institution and demonstrated how executive power could be exercised with restraint and dignity. His tenure helped assuage the fears of those who had doubted the wisdom of a single executive. The legacy of the 1787 Convention. The decision to adopt a single executive has had lasting consequences for American governance. Over time, the presidency has evolved in response to national crises, wars, social movements, and technological change. Yet the core structure conceived in 1787 remains intact. Presidents from Abraham Lincoln to Franklin Roosevelt to Ronald Reagan have interpreted the powers of the office in ways that reflect both the flexibility and the limits of the constitutional design. In times of crisis, the president's ability to act swiftly has been invaluable. In times of peace, the checks and balances have served to curb executive overreach. Modern implications, strengths and strains today, the idea of a single executive continues to be both a source of strength and a subject of scrutiny. The concentration of power in one individual allows for swift decision-making and a clear national voice. However, it also raises concerns about unilateral action, especially in areas such as foreign policy and emergency powers. Debates about executive orders, war powers, and the limits of presidential authority echo the concerns of 1787. Modern presidents operate in a vastly more complex environment, but the underlying questions remain. How much power is too much? How do we ensure accountability without undermining effectiveness? Conclusion: a bold but balanced choice. The framers of the Constitution took a calculated risk in creating a single executive. They rejected both the inefficacy of plural leadership and the dangers of monarchy. Instead, they forged a new path, one that balanced energy with restraint, authority with accountability. The presidency, as envisioned in 1787, remains one of the most remarkable features of the American political system. It is a testament to the foresight of the convention delegates that their design continues to function, albeit under constant adaptation and debate. As the nation continues to grapple with the challenges of leadership in a complex world, the road to one-man leadership that began in Philadelphia offers both lessons and inspiration for the future.
Thanks for watching. Please like, Share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
The Constitution and power. What is a president?
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
The office of the President of the United States stands as one of the most visible and powerful political roles in the world today. Yet when the Founding Fathers gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 for the Constitutional Convention, the idea of a strong, singular executive was far from universally accepted. Their debates, compromises, and innovations laid the foundation for what would become a uniquely American institution, the presidency. The Philadelphia Convention of 1787, a turning point in political thought. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was convened to address the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, the United States' first governing document. Under the Articles, the national government had no executive branch and lacked the authority to enforce laws or unify the states under a cohesive policy. The absence of a central executive highlighted the need for a more robust structure to ensure national unity and effective governance. Delegates to the convention faced a monumental task: how to construct a government strong enough to function effectively without replicating the tyrannical monarchy they had fought against during the Revolutionary War. At the heart of this challenge was the question, what should an American executive look like? Creating the presidency. A blend of ideas and ideals, the framers of the Constitution were deeply influenced by both classical political theory and recent historical experience. The fear of tyranny led many to initially favor a plural executive or an executive subordinate to the legislature. Others, however, recognized the need for energy and decisiveness in leadership, qualities difficult to achieve through a committee. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and George Washington were among those who supported a strong, singular executive. Washington, who would become the nation's first president, served as a symbol of virtuous leadership and provided reassurance to those wary of centralized power. Hamilton, in particular, argued in the Federalist Papers, notably in Federalist No. 70, that a single executive would be more effective and accountable than a group. The result was a compromise, a president with clearly defined powers but constrained by checks and balances. The executive would be elected independently of the legislature, serve a 4-year term, and be eligible for re-election. The president would act as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, negotiate treaties with Senate approval, appoint officials, and have the power to veto legislation. Yet Congress retained the power to override vetoes, approve appointments, and in extreme cases, impeach and remove the president. Defining the role. The Constitution's Vision Article 2 of the Constitution outlines the powers and responsibilities of the president. It is deliberately less detailed than Article 1, which describes the legislative branch, leaving room for interpretation and evolution. This ambiguity has allowed the presidency to adapt over time, but has also led to debates over the limits of executive power. The president's primary responsibility is to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. This charge, though seemingly straightforward, grants the president substantial discretion in enforcing federal laws. Additionally, the Constitution grants the president the authority to grant pardons, convene special sessions of Congress, and receive ambassadors. Crucially, the president is also the symbolic head of state, representing the unity and identity of the nation. This dual role, as both chief executive and ceremonial leader, has contributed to the office's growing prominence over the centuries. Evolution of the presidency. From Washington to modern times, George Washington set numerous precedents as the first president, including the tradition of a peaceful transfer of power and the establishment of a cabinet. He also voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, a standard followed until Franklin D. Roosevelt's 4-term presidency led to the 22nd Amendment, which officially limited presidents to 2 terms. Over time, the scope of presidential power expanded. Andrew Jackson enhanced the political role of the presidency by appealing directly to the people, while Abraham Lincoln assumed extraordinary powers during the Civil War. The 20th century saw further growth, particularly under presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Lyndon B. Johnson, who used the office to enact sweeping domestic reforms. In times of crisis, war, economic depression, terrorism, the presidency has often become the focal point of national action. While this centralization can enhance efficiency and coherence, it also raises concerns about the erosion of checks and balances. Checks and balances, guardrails of democracy. The founders designed the U.S. Constitution with a system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. The president may propose legislation and veto bills, but only Congress can make laws and control the budget. The judiciary can review the constitutionality of executive actions, as seen in landmark Supreme Court cases. Impeachment is perhaps the most dramatic check on presidential power. The House of Representatives has the authority to impeach, and the Senate conducts the trial. Though few presidents have been impeached and none removed through this process, the mechanism underscores the principle that no one is above the law. Moreover, the president's power is tempered by political realities. Public opinion, media, scrutiny, and opposition parties serve as informal but powerful constraints. A president must build coalitions, negotiate, and often compromise to achieve policy goals. The presidency. Today, continuity and change. Today's presidency is a complex institution supported by a vast executive bureaucracy. Modern presidents must navigate a globalized world, instantaneous media coverage, and intense political polarization. They are expected to be not only policymakers but also moral leaders, crisis managers, and global diplomats. Despite these challenges, the fundamental principles established in 1787 remain. The president is still elected by the people, through the Electoral College, still limited by law, and still accountable to the public. Debates over executive authority, transparency, and the balance of power continue, reflecting the dynamic nature of the office. Conclusion. The enduring legacy of the 1787 Convention, the Constitutional Convention of 1787, produced a document that has guided the United States for over 2 centuries. In crafting the presidency, the framers combined caution with ambition, creating an office capable of both strong leadership and responsible governance. The President of the United States is not a monarch, nor a mere administrator, but a unique blend of democratic accountability and executive power. As the world changes and new challenges emerge, the presidency will continue to evolve. Yet, its foundation remains rooted in the vision of those who met in Philadelphia, a leader who serves the people, respects the Constitution, and upholds the principles of a free republic.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.
The birth of leadership, when the world saw its first president.
But before we start to get into the video, please support us by like, share, and subscribe to this channel so that we can provide new insights and knowledge about world history. Thank you.
In the grand narrative of world history, few events are as transformative as the creation of a new system of governance. Among these, the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 stands as a monumental moment, not only for the United States, but for the evolution of political leadership globally. It was here, amid the humid rooms of Independence Hall, that a group of men set forth a radical vision, a nation guided not by monarchy or aristocracy, but by a president, an office then unprecedented in power and scope. The creation of the American presidency during this seminal convention was a defining act that shaped the modern concept of democratic leadership. Before 1787, the idea of a single executive leader, elected and bound by constitutional constraints, was largely untested. Monarchies dominated much of the globe, with kings and emperors wielding near absolute power. Even the fledgling American states, under the Articles of Confederation, had resisted central executive authority for fear of tyranny. Yet, the weaknesses of the Articles, chief among them the inability to enforce laws or collect taxes, made clear the need for a stronger, more centralized form of leadership. The Philadelphia Convention was convened in response to this crisis. Originally intended to revise the Articles of Confederation, the convention soon took on a more ambitious goal: to draft an entirely new constitution. This constitution would not only balance the interests of large and small states, free and slave-holding states, but also reconcile fears of centralized power with the need for effective national leadership. At the heart of this debate was the question: what kind of leader should America have? The delegates were deeply divided. Some
feared the rise of another monarch. Others believed a strong executive was essential to unity and stability.
Among them, figures like Alexander Hamilton argued for a powerful presidency, even suggesting a lifetime term in office to ensure stability. Others, like Edmund Randolph and George Mason, warned against the dangers of executive overreach, emphasizing the lessons learned from British tyranny. The debates were intense, with competing visions of leadership clashing over matters such as term length, methods of election, powers, and accountability. Eventually, the framers arrived at a compromise. They crafted an executive branch led by a president, elected independently of the legislature, serving a 4-year term, and subject to checks and balances from the other branches of government. This president would command the military, oversee foreign affairs, enforce laws, and possess the power to veto legislation. Yet he would also be constrained by Congress and the judiciary, and ultimately accountable to the people through periodic elections and the possibility of impeachment. This was a groundbreaking model. While other nations had elected leaders within parliaments or councils, none had established a singular executive with such defined and constitutional powers, selected by a process involving both state and national interests, the Electoral College. In essence, the framers were creating an entirely new political role: a civilian leader with the stature of a monarch but bound by the rule of law, a president. The design of the presidency also reflected the careful balancing act that defined the entire Constitution. It was a role designed to be energetic yet limited, powerful yet accountable. The very idea of separating the powers of government, executive, legislative, and judicial, was intended to prevent any one branch from dominating the others. The president, while vested with significant authority, would not be above the law, and his legitimacy would be drawn from the people's will rather than divine right or hereditary succession. When the Constitution was ratified in 1788, the world witnessed the birth of this new office. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. Washington's presidency was crucial in legitimizing the new system. Aware of the fragility of the republic, he set enduring precedents. Voluntarily, stepping down after 2 terms, appointing a cabinet, and maintaining a dignified but approachable image of executive power. His leadership gave substance to what had been, until then, only theoretical. Washington's presidency was also instrumental in shaping public perception of the office. He traveled across the states to unite the new nation, set standards for diplomatic protocol, and signed legislation that laid the groundwork for a functioning federal government. He refused titles such as His Excellency, opting simply for Mr. President, a powerful statement that underscored the office's democratic nature. In doing so, he distinguished the American model from European monarchies and asserted a new form of leadership, one built on service, responsibility, and public trust. The impact of the American presidency reverberated far beyond the young republics. borders. In Europe, where absolute monarchies still reigned, the notion of a powerful yet accountable executive was revolutionary. Over time, other nations began experimenting with presidential or semi-presidential systems, adapting elements of the American model to suit their own cultures and needs. The United States had not just created a new nation, it had introduced a new archetype of leadership. Throughout the 19th century, the role of the president expanded and evolved. Presidents like Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and Abraham Lincoln each left distinct marks on the office, interpreting its powers in ways that sometimes sparked controversy, but also revealed its capacity for growth. Jefferson emphasized Republican simplicity and westward expansion. Jackson championed the voice of the common man and expanded executive power. Lincoln, during the Civil War, stretched presidential authority to preserve the Union, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation and suspending habeas corpus during wartime. Each of these leaders interpreted the framework of the Constitution through the lens of necessity and vision. Yet the birth of the presidency was not without flaws. The Constitution left ambiguous many questions, such as the extent of executive privilege, the limits of wartime powers, and the balance between federal and state authority. Furthermore, the exclusion of women, enslaved people, and non-property-owning men from the political process highlighted the limitations of this early vision of democracy. Still, the structure set in 1787 provided a flexible yet durable foundation that would evolve over centuries. The 20th and 21st centuries saw the presidency tested and transformed by modern challenges. From Franklin D. Roosevelt's unprecedented 4 terms during the Great Depression and World War II, to the Watergate scandal that forced Richard Nixon's resignation, the office has demonstrated both its potential for powerful leadership and its vulnerability to abuse. The post-Watergate reforms, including the War Powers Resolution and greater congressional oversight, underscored the ongoing tension between executive energy and democratic accountability. Today, the office of the president remains a central fixture. In American political life, its powers and responsibilities shaped by tradition, precedent, and constitutional interpretation.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you like videos like this. Thank you.